Hello, my name is Steve Player. I'm the Program Director for the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable here in North America. I'd like to welcome you to this video cast as we share with you some of our online tools to improve the way that you can implement the Beyond Budgeting methodology. My guest today is Peter Bunce. Peter is a co-founder of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable and our Program Director in Europe. Peter's the man behind many of the tools and techniques that you see that we have online. In today's session, we're going to talk about the online implementation methodology. Peter, could you give us some background and history about how the tool came into being and where it stands today?
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to describe the whole of this guide to you. The online implementation guide was a complete rewrite of a guide that we did in a paper document form in September 2008. And so this first online version was completed in March 2009. Since then, we've done 3 revisions. And as you can see, when you go into the guide, the first page tells you what the revisions are here. So you can see when they've all been made. It represents some 300 pages of text, plus an additional 300 pages of linked supporting examples. We made it an interactive guide so that you can easily link to the supporting examples and cases, and also it means we can update it section by section, page by page, as we learn new things, and you learn new things and feed them through to us, so we can keep it an online living document rather than some sterile fixed printed device. So each of the supporting examples we'll see later is a separate Adobe Acrobat file. It refers to several private sector cases and 4 public sector cases. So that's the background to the guide. Now, if we start looking at this first page, this is the page you'll get when you first go into the guide. As I said, it gives you a little introduction to it. It tells you what's new, what's changed since you might last have looked at it. Hopefully, you look at it pretty often. Then there's a contents page. So if you click here where it says contents, or click here, there you get a contents page. Looks pretty much like what you get in a book, but very detailed contents page. And as you can see, all of these, most of these major sections there are links to the section within the guide. So from the contents page, you can get anywhere. Now, if we look at the top, along the top ribbon here, we've got the basic navigation, the home page, executive summary, the case for change, beyond budgeting principles, implementation, cases, theory behind all of this, conclusions, and some frequently asked questions. We tried to address those, and that's an area where I'm sure that'll keep changing and expanding as we go on. So that down the left-hand side, you can see this changes, this left-hand side, depending on which section you're in. But on this section, we can see all of the major ones that are linked across the top. Plus, we've got the supporting examples, acknowledgements, definitions, list of cases, our bibliography, glossary, forum, diagnostics. So you can get easily into those additional pieces of information. So if we look at additional information here, we can see their supporting examples, and that lists them all of the ones that are in separate Adobe Acrobat files. I won't show them in great detail. We'll look at some of those as we go through. Acknowledgements, of course, the acknowledgement there was to the members. Oh, yeah, and that's a list we have to keep updating because, you know, people keep joining and keep adding to this information. Then we get some definitions. What we mean by beyond budgeting, what we mean by performance management, what we mean by budget. What about a target? What about a goal? What we mean by that, and a forecast and a plan. That's so that we've got some basics there, so we don't have those arguments about what do you mean by a budget and what do we mean by a budget. So that's and then there's the list of cases. These are the cases that, all the cases we've ever done in BBRT, and they're all in the members community, and these are links to those files. So you can get to those through the implementation guide.
Peter, let me ask you a quick question there, if I could.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I remember when I started with Beyond Budgeting back in the early days when I first started going, before I joined the roundtable. You were doing case study research, and when I joined the roundtable, one of the things I did was eagerly go to the, before we even had the CD-ROM, and I printed out all the case studies. So in my office, in my library, still sits those notebooks or those case studies racked up there. Are you telling me all that stuff now is at my fingertips anywhere in the world just by going to the internet and getting this online guide?
Absolutely, Steve. Yes, it's all there available for you. You don't need to print it unless you really want to read it on a plane or something. But all of those files are there online anywhere in the world through the members community. You can tap straight into them
Excellent,
and
excellent.
download them onto your laptop and or whatever you want to do with them.
Okay,
So it's always there. All that information is always there for you.
okay. Peter, take us through it. I mean, if you've got over 600 pages of text and linked examples and support, that's a tremendous amount of material. Take us
Yeah.
through how a company that was just starting with Beyond Budgeting, how would they get themselves familiar with this? How would they use this guide?
Well, what I'd suggest to begin with is to start with the executive summary. This is just a much shorter piece, and people who are still trying to get their head around what Beyond Budgeting is all about should look through this. First of all, we've got this introduction to it, and then we've got 11 questions in the executive summary. Why you should change. Let me bring those up a bit, see if I can bring them up in a magnified form.
That would help.
Oops, no, there we go. So, and we'll just move this over here so we don't get that in the way. So it says why you should change, what is Beyond Budgeting, what is the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, which organizations have gone beyond budgeting, and we define in that what we mean by gone beyond budgeting. Well, why is the real problem concerned, and I can see I've got a spelling mistake there, but we'll correct that. And 3 case examples. What are the Beyond Budgeting principles? What are the benefits? How do you manage the implementation process? Is now the right time to change? What should you do next? So, as you can see, some simple questions there to go through with people so that they can see what they're doing. And then on the left-hand side, you can see in the navigation, so if you go into a page, Beyond Budgeting Organizations, for instance, we've put it into learning cases and transformation cases, so you can always get back to where you wanted to within the executive summary. So if we look at one here like Southwest Airlines, oops, that link's broken. That's a bad one to choose, wasn't it? Guardian Industries. You'll have to edit. So Guardian Industries, we got this quick. This isn't the full case that we wrote. This is a summary of the case for the purposes of within the guide itself. But what we've done is we've put them into these 5 areas: governance and transparency, accountable teams, goals and rewards, planning and control, resource management. So you've got them in the same kind of format all within the guide, so you can compare the cases.
So
that's the kind of thing.
Peter, so the case summaries in this format are basically being used to support the principle being made. So where the support material you get the full case study was originally written up, this is where you've taken snippets and excerpts and applied it to say, okay, this is how Guardian Industries handles this particular issue.
Yes. What I haven't yet explained is that within the 12 Beyond Budgeting principles, we've actually categorized them into these 5 areas of governance and transparency, accountable teams, goals and rewards, planning and control, resource management. We haven't changed the principles themselves. We just try to bring a bit more clarity to it.
Okay.
So the cases are looked at within those 5 areas.
Okay.
So there you can see those cases. So that's the executive summary. So if we look at those are the organizations that have gone beyond budgeting. So then we go for the case for change. So somebody spent some time, the team who are going to get involved with this, if they spend some time going through the executive summary, understanding that, then looking at the case for change. And this gives us some ideas about why you want to make the change. And this section has 10 parts to it. Let's look at those in more detail again. We're going to have to... It doesn't want to do that. I can't get across to it. Sorry. Anyway, the sections there are the traditional budgeting process, the golden age of planning and control, the budgeting model with short-term targets and incentives at its core is deeply flawed. Budgeting is out of kilter with its competitive environment, or as you might say in the States, it's out of whack with its competitive environment. Case for change from the CEO perspective, from the CFO perspective, from the HR perspective. Case for change from the operations perspective, and then fixing the parts, including better budgeting, is not the answer. And the emerging management model. So we're really addressing all kind of issues that people ask when they're saying, how do I make this case for change? Because we always advise people when you start down this road, you want to write your own case for change, why you want to change, what you're going to change to, what your vision is, of what your new management model is going to look like. It'll probably be different when you finally get there, but you need to have that written down, and it's a great exercise to write it down and share it with people so that you can comment on it and discuss it as you go through.
Well, Peter,
so this is a
I know
yes, sir.
I know there'll be many people that are building that case for change now, particularly companies that are just investigating and getting started with this. And so it's a great tool. A lot of companies, though, because of what happened in late 2008, certainly with 2009, the markets were reeling so much that they had to move beyond their budgets very quickly and get to a situation where they were managing without them.
Yes.
For those kind of companies that have already made the case for change, what's the risk they run by just saying, okay, we decided we don't need that anymore, let's jump to something else, let's move very quickly into that? Do you still recommend they do something to document why they're making that change?
Yes, I do, because I think it makes you think about why you're doing this. I think even if some of it's a bit retrospective, but it's saying this is why we've made the change and this is the vision we've got. And you've got to be careful, because you can't just sort of take out the budget, go beyond it and do nothing. You've got to put other control tools in place, and you're still going to do financial planning.
Yeah, let me make that point.
You've got to do that.
Yeah, let me make that point real clear. Beyond Budgeting firmly believes in planning. They just don't believe the budget's a very effective way of doing it.
Exactly.
Okay. So the guidance is use this case for change to help you write it down, articulate very clearly in your own words why you want to change, what you're trying to achieve with that, so that as you design the new approach, you can understand what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. If we look at the CEO case for change here for a minute, this is the case for change from the CEO's perspective, because that's the question a lot of CEOs will ask. What's in it for me what's in it for the company? How does it affect my role, and how is it going to make it better for me in managing the business? And those are the kind of issues that we've put down here. Some 4 examples. It prevents clear visibility and fast response. The budget at the moment is too bureaucratic and expensive. It protects costs. It's divorced from strategy, and so it stifles initiative and innovation. And then there's some articles here that back up some of this stuff. So if we pick on, say, this is where we get down to these supporting examples I was talking about earlier. If we look at Gary Hamel, the need for innovation teams, you can suddenly see, here's a very short piece from Gary Hamel from his book Leading Revolution, or from his paper, talking about that. So those are all available to you as you go through, relevant to the section you're looking at. But this point is we're trying to sort of think of some of the issues that excuse me, that people think about. How can I explain it to my CEO? How can I explain it to my CFO? What's the HR issues involved? So, but I think it's important that people do write this down and do think about what's the vision and think it through. It's a cathartic exercise to write things down rather than just vaguely thinking about it.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the key points, Peter, about having this as an online guide. What we're looking for is really 2 things. We're looking for people to use the guide and work with it, but we're also looking for the additions. If you see things that help you make the case for change, that's where the membership network comes into play, because people contribute back what they learned how to do. They contribute back their extra points in case for change, and so this case for change just keeps getting more robust. And so if a person adds some extra points to add to the case for change, how would they submit them to you? Are you the keeper of the...
Yeah, I'm the keeper of it. Well, Jeremy Hope has done most of the writing on this. I've done most of the coding. I've done all the coding. But the way to submit these things is to send at the moment is to send them by via email. Hopefully, uh, we'll change the system one day where we can actually you can add a comment at the bottom of the page, so that we can all see it. And so so you can say, well, I found out this, and then somebody else can make a comment on that. But we're working towards that. But at the moment, send them in an email to me. My email address is on our website, so you can easily find that.
Okay.
And that's the best way of getting the information back at the moment.
Okay. What else on the case for change, Peter?
Uh, that's pretty much it on the case for change. I think if we look at the last one, the emerging management model, we then describe how we see the management model changing, and it's kind of the way a lot of people have been finding over the last year or so that really they can't cope with being highly centralized, particularly if they're a global operation. It just doesn't work. Things are moving too fast, things are changing too quickly for them, and so they've got to decentralize. And we don't mean just decentralize in the old word. It means pushing power responsibility down to the frontline units, making them much more accountable for what's going on. But then you've got to put in place a lot of other um, key performance indicators so you can measure that, so these people aren't just running away with it. So there's a lot of work here talking about the accountability map, which we'll look at in more detail as we go on. Here's just a view of it as we look at it. So you can see the accountability map here, where we're saying really you're moving to three teams. You've got the executive team, the value center teams, and then of course the customer, and then the support services. But we can look at that as we go through in a bit more detail.
Okay.
So that's really the emerging management model. So in the executive guide, executive summary, we're just giving you a summary of that model. It gets talked about in much more detail as we go through. And then also here you'll see the 12 principles listed out
Okay.
and a bit more information.
So,
So that's as far as the executive summary goes.
okay.
And that was the case for change there. I went back to that because I think it was important to show that. Now, I think at this point, if we move on to the 12 principles, this is the 12 principles of beyond budgeting. As I said, they've never changed because they're still totally valid. So in the book that was written in 2003, we set out these 12 principles, and here we are as we wrote them there. What we found in our journey since then is that although these 12 principles have been doing a great job, they're not set out in a way that supports implementation. So we've stuck with a similar set. We've still got the same set, but we've changed the order around. As I said earlier, we've put them into these 5 sections. Governance and transparency, which has values, performance and transparency. Accountable teams, which has got organization, autonomy and accountability. Then the 6 process principles, goals and rewards, goals, rewards. Then we move on to planning and control. So we've got planning, coordination and controls. And then finally, resource management. So these are the 12 principles. Now, each of these then has a page, a web page within the guide, each principle. And what we've done also beyond here is we've contrasted the command and control model, if you like, the traditional way of managing since about 1920s, with beyond budgeting way. So you can go through the 12 and see what the difference is. If we look at controls, for instance, managers in command and control are tied to budgets. Beyond budgeting, managers are guided by holistic measures, which are measures of looking forward. Look at rewards. Rewards in the command and control are based on fixed targets, meeting fixed numbers. Beyond budgeting, rewards are based on relative improvement. And you might notice we're using the word reward here, not incentive, because you're not incentivizing people to hit a fixed number. You're actually rewarding them on achieving a relative improvement, preferably for the business, not just for the individual. So these are the principles that we go through. Each principle, as I said, has a separate page, and in each principle, if we look at the first one, you'll see that each of them starts off with 3 parts to it: introduction, the implementation guidelines, and what beyond budgeting organizations have gained. So then there's a lot of text on each of those and some pictures to help help break it up and just describe it more. And then subsections within it. And then when we get to implementation guidelines, so if we go to the top here and I click on that one, you'll see it takes you down to implementation guidelines. And each of these have got somewhere between 6 and 10 subsections on implementation guidelines telling you what to do. And on this one, if we look at it, this was the principle of govern through a few clear values, goals and boundaries, not detailed rules and budgets. So in the implementation guidelines, we bring that one up a bit bigger. So we go up a bit with that, and then you can see, so it says frame your purpose, prepare and publish a short booklet on governance and values, and so forth. All the way down there you can see we've given information on these things.
Now, Peter, I noticed on some of these things that a lot of this information that's in these guidelines comes directly out of implementation case experience. I think, for instance, Statoil Hydro. It's got a great example of their ambition to action, which is a small booklet they distribute to all employees. It's their way of communicating what they're trying to do. So, is that where the bulk of this all comes from? Is real case-based research?
All the bulk of it. All of this comes from real case experiences, those original case studies we did, new ones. It's also working with individual companies, because we've also have done and continue to do workshops with individual companies, 1 and 2 day workshops, taking you through this stuff. And we learn a lot ourselves from that, and we've put it back into the guide. And as you can see here, we've mentioned companies where we've mentioned IKEA as a company here. Unfortunately, we're never allowed to publish the case study we did on IKEA because they're such a secretive company. They're happy to talk, but not let us publish anything. But we've tried to bring in some of what we know about that to this guide. There we've got Southwest Airlines. So all of it is based on what we've learned from companies, not just on what we've learned from academics or anything like that. It's really bringing in the company experiences.
Okay.
So so if we look at that, that's the how the whole section here is divided up, and as you can see, you've got all of the guides here. And the latest one we've done is principle number 11, controls. We rewrote this section completely in March 2010, and it's much more substantial than the previous section. And this gives you an idea how we can quickly change something. And back to Steve's point here about Statoil. Here's some stuff on Statoil. And then if we go down here, we've got the implementation guidelines, and it's really talking us through identify teams and define success criteria. One of the things we've found, firstly in the public sector, and we've also found it with private sector companies, they're often not clear on what success looks like in the business. It's like, meeting the expectations of the market. No, what does success really look like in your business? Is it being number one in the marketplace, or is it being the most profitable? And personally, I think being number one in the marketplace is totally vacuous. It gets you absolutely nowhere. What you really need to do, or is it being that the customer is number one and everything else will follow from that? But it's being very clear about what the success criteria are. And then you can build your KPI database from that. Then you can report on success and take action. If you're not clear on that first one, you haven't got a hope. So that's a very good thing to do. And then we identify the teams and define that criteria and so forth, moving through. I'm whipping down through here, but it's a big section. A lot of pictures. We use a lot of things to do with analytics in this section and health indices. So that quite helps. It helps to focus people on keeping the information down. People come out with KPIs, 40, 50, 60 KPIs. There's no way you can manage with that number. If we look at Handelsbanken, they look at about 3 or 4 KPIs from each of their branches every month. That's all. That's all they're using to manage. That's all they need. There's a lot of massive detail behind that, but they don't need to see that. They don't need to see that at corporate level. It's not important. Anything else, that tells them enough to know where they're going. So this is trying to explain that. And looking at forecast, trends, and gap management as we go through. So I'm not going to go into all the details here because this is all the stuff you need to know. But here's some more of these also C's that you can see. The service profit chain at Handelsbanken, for instance.
Those are the Peter.
Should come up.
These are the links you're talking about. The links into different areas where the details are used to illustrate.
Yes, that's right. These are supporting examples, supporting papers, if you like. This is a 3-page paper.
Okay.
So rather than put all of this information within the page, which would make it hugely long, they're in separate pieces, so you can go and look at them if you feel like it, or just gloss over it and carry on.
Peter, I guess that's got to be one of the huge challenge of a guide so large and comprehensive is kind of what do you put in that helps people guide along when you have so much great material to put in? How do you balance that and try to keep it in the right game so somebody can get all the way through and then dig deeper if they need to?
Well, this is what we try to create, that balance, by putting the words we've got within the online pages and then putting that supporting stuff as separate PDFs which you can bring up or download or do what you like with. But let's try to keep that balance so the information is there if you want to go to it, but it's not brought into the whole guide because it would be huge, humongous. Right. The same with the references. It's basically saying here are some references. They're in the text. You'll find little numbers so you can see which is the reference, where we got that from, which is a good academic discipline to do this. So you can go and look at those references if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And that's an important part, so that you're seeing there's a greater mass of material out there than we've put within this. But we've tried to keep that balance between putting enough information in to enable you to go through and then providing further information later.
Yeah, it brings up an excellent point, Peter, that I think a lot of people sometimes get misconstrued in that a lot of people think about joining the roundtable as a corporate member as being something that when you look at, they want to say, well, we're doing that or we're heavily implementing. They want to be coming as an accomplished implementer. Whereas the reality is where they ought to be coming from is the other way when you don't know, when you're first getting started, when you're just trying to learn to begin with. There's a wealth of information in your implementation guide that is huge. And so it's really more for the person who's just getting started to get into this and really serve as a guide to help them through and help them learn very deeply in terms of what's going on. So
well, actually, Steve, I'd go a bit further than that. I'd say it's for both. It's for the people who are just getting started to help them get them started on the right way and in the right road. But for the people who've got seriously involved already, is going back and checking, did I do that right? I'm having problems in this area. What does the guide tell me about that? So it's helping even the people who are quite well down the road to do that. But what I would also add to that is to say, and I get a number of companies say, look at BBRT and joining BBRT, and they say, well, perhaps we'll come back and look at this when we've got much further down the road of implementing. And I keep saying to them, no, you don't want to do that. Now's the time to get involved, when you're just thinking about it, just developing, when you haven't written your case for change, because then you get all that information from what we've learned, from what the other members are learning. That will come in and it'll make your journey so much easier and so much more productive than if you wait to join later.
So it's a great accelerator. It's a great leverage point, if you will, saying how to learn much more quickly than I would otherwise.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
So let's go on to the next section, implementation. Unless you want to look at any more sections here, Steve, on the 12 principles.
Well, in the interest of time, let's dive on into implementation, because I know that's a high concern for everybody. How do I get this implemented?
Right. Now, here we get to the difficulty. For some time, right since the beginning, people have said, we want a cookbook on implementation. Tell us how to do it. And the big problem is at the BBRT level, you can't write a cookbook that's going to be totally applicable for every company, because every company is different. It's got different cultures. It's got a different or type of organization. Some are service businesses, some are manufacturing. They're all starting from a different place in this. So what we have to do is be necessarily generic and describe a kind of roadmap and the kind of things you ought to be thinking about as you go down the implementation road. This is where the case studies come in, because what they do is they describe how some people have gone about this, what they've done. But you're never going to replicate that in your own company. You'll learn lessons from those cases, but you won't be able to replicate every detail because there'll be differences. So here we look at implementation. We divide it into two big sections, the implementation roadmap and models, tools, and techniques. So what we've done here, if we look at that section, implementation roadmap, we've started off by saying there are 7 common implementation pitfalls. And that is, first of all, and this is really key, not holistic. And that is thinking that the purpose of the change is only to abandon budgeting rather than improving the whole performance management model. You know, I went and talked to the executive management team of a bank in Norway. And when I'd finished, they said, wow, we thought this was just about taking out the budget. We've suddenly realized it's a whole lot more than that. And they weren't saying it with fear in their heart. They were saying it with excitement on their faces. You know, we can really make some changes here now. We can really do something important. It's not just about abandoning the budgets. And Hilti, the case that was speaking at our recent meeting in Copenhagen, he was explaining it on their journey. They didn't start out to abandon budgets. They started out to improve the way they manage the business. And some years down the road, they said, what is this budget thing? It's irrelevant. We don't need it. We're not using it. And they just stopped doing it. And nothing happened because they'd put everything else in place. So you've got to be holistic. And being not engaged is another pitfall. And that's believing you can drive the whole thing through finance alone. You've got to engage everybody, every part of the business. And again, not having a vision, starting to implement something without first building a robust case for change, as I've said earlier. Then having the wrong focus, failing to realize the power must be transferred from the center to the front line. So you've got to look about teams and being not coherent. And that is not understanding the order in which you've got to do things in your own business. For instance, if you were to take out the budget and you find that you've at the moment got a scheme of individual incentives linked to fixed targets which are built into the budget, what's going to happen to that when you take out the budget? Total chaos. So you've got to really think that through. What are we going to do first? Which bits have we got to tackle first? And then failing to see the wrong style, that the change process cannot be mandated from the corporate center. The corporate center can enable it, they can start the process, but eventually people will grab it for themselves and they'll start to run with it. And then that's really good. And then not continuing, declaring victory far too soon. You know, the company that says, well, after 18 months we've done it. We've put everything in place and it's done, finished. We can wrap the whole thing up now. It's all done. We've done beyond budgeting. You've only just about started. The real danger point is about then, because until it gets really embedded in the psyche of the company, it won't get stuck. So you've got to keep on keeping on. And I keep saying to people in implementation, they call it a project, but projects have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in beyond budgeting, it has a beginning, and then the rest is the middle. There is no end, because you carry on learning and developing and improving year after year after year. When you think about it, Handelsbanken are still improving the way they manage the business. They've been at it 30, 35 years. So that's why it says you've got to keep continuing. So that's the background to it. So it's some of the issues there we discovered. And this is an important one, we think, as well, in implementation. Establishing a guiding coalition. We've stolen these words from John Cotter, but these are the kind of issues there, and they're his 8 principles, if you like, to follow through. And you need this team of people, this cross-functional team of people, to help guide it through and work on it. You can't have one person managing it. It just doesn't work. So get the right people on the bus is the main thing there. Engage the right people. Grow the coalition strategically. Work as a team, not just as a collection of individuals. So that's a key one there. Um, and then the other one, communicate. You can't do enough of this. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Keep telling people what you're doing. And this gives you some ideas about what to do, keeping it simple. Selling the vision for change, convincing, here's an example, convincing the board at Borealis, how they went about that. Selling the vision for change. And then implementing the model. Going through the 12 principles here again, and describing those in some detail in those 5 sections I talked about, and what you need to do in each of those sections. And you will want to look back at the 12 principles and the great detail in there as you go through this. So all these things are linked. So you'll want to go back and look at that at some point. Training and education. Look for quick wins. It's no good saying to people, well, yes, in 10 years' time we'll have done this. Just wait 10 years and then it'll be all right. They want to see something now. They want to see some improvements now already, even though the vision means it's going to take a bit longer. And here's an example we've quoted from Gary Crittenden when he was at American Express. Early wins are really important because they help to build credibility in the organization. In their case, delivering significant cost savings and better information sent clear messages to all the businesses that these changes meant something. So that kind of thing really reinforces what you're doing, and that's important. The other one is work around the resistors, and because you're always going to get the people, as John Cotter has said, who say no, 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 this can't work. We've tried that before, it didn't work, and so it goes on. And that reminds me of something else I find. It's not quite the resistors, but when I talk to companies and they look quickly at beyond budgeting and say, yeah, we're doing all that, we're doing all that. And when you really look at the company, they're not doing it all. They're not doing beyond budgeting at all. They're really still stuck in command and control. What they've got is a few tools and techniques that they think means they're doing it all. It's like the people who say they're doing lean, but all they can do is they can just about spell the word. So that's it. So that's on the implementation roadmap. Then we look at it, models, tools, and techniques. And then what we do is to go through some of these tools and techniques, like the balanced scorecard, economic value added. And look at the balanced scorecard, for instance. We talk about what is the balanced scorecard, how is it implemented in a command and control organization, the problems that you get when you do that. For instance, it undermines the annual budgeting culture. And then how is it done in a beyond budgeting organization? How does it, beyond budgeting, really, with a lot of these tools, it really unlocks them and helps them to realize their full potential, which you don't get when you're in a command and control organization where everything is key to the budget. So lean operations is another one. What are lean operations? How they work in command and control, or don't work as the case may be, and how they can be much more effective in a beyond budgeting organization. And particularly with lean, the whole key there is we believe that at the top you need to have a beyond budgeting type of way of managing to enable lean to properly work throughout the business. And this is one of the things, I know Toyota might be a bad word at the moment, but it's the thing that underpins the whole Toyota production system is the Toyota way and their way of thinking, the way they manage. And that's really key here. And that's the bit that most people don't get with lean. They don't see it, they don't understand it. So we've got a lot of things here. And we've looked at 10 tools. Now, if you think there are others we need to look at, people can send that to us and we'll look at that and build that in as we go forward. So again, we've got some also C's down here, 16 lessons on applying principles, some observations on ISO 9000, which I know, or 9001, which I know is a big issue for a number of people, measuring end-to-end customer outcomes at Fujitsu, and so forth. So again, if you click on these, you get up a short paper or even just a very short section on it. Some general observation on ISO 9000. I won't go into the ins and outs of that now. That would take us a whole meeting if we wanted. So there we go. That's through the implementation. do you think? I think, Steve, that helps people to understand, gives them a framework in which to do their implementation. It doesn't give them a total cookbook and a recipe, but it gives them the framework in how to go about it
Well, the thing
and some ideas to think about.
I think, Peter, when you were doing that analogy, it's saying, a guy wants a cookbook and a recipe. It reminds me when I was in the kitchen at the house, which I don't do very often, but occasionally I get pressed into service. And my wife said, just get a cookbook and make a recipe in the cookbook. Well, to begin with, my wife has about 100 cookbooks. She used to write a food column for the local paper, and so she collects cookbooks. So first thing is, which of these 100 cookbooks are out there? And you get them out, and you realize each one of them require a set of ingredients, a set of pots and pans and cookware, seasonings and spices and so forth. So much like anybody's kitchen is different than anybody else's kitchen, so are our companies. They're very different in terms of their ingredients, in terms of their mixes. I mean, if I'm in an Asian household, I'm likely to find a wok. If I'm in a player household, I don't have a wok. I love Chinese food. I just never cooked it that much. But so you really get into saying you can't have one cookbook, but the real good chef is the one who knows how to apply all the different things in different kind of settings. And that's what I like about the tool that you show here us online. It's the richness and robustness, and there's an extra effort here, more so than most improvement techniques have tried to do, where there's a trying to show how it fits in, because we are talking about the management model. And at the heart, that's what this is really about. It's about the brain. It's about how we plan and control our organizations. So when we think about the brain in that regard, it's really trying to figure out how to get these things to work together. So the whole emphasis on the linking to other tools and other improvement methods, and to show how these things can come together and work in harness in unison and can pull the same direction, I think is very helpful for organizations in terms of what's out there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I think so. That's true. That's true, Steve. Yeah. In your cooking analogy, and what happens when you get the recipe out, you find you haven't got all of those ingredients.
Well, that could be a problem. I'm a kind of improvisation guy, but it could be a problem.
But what you do, and it's the same here, it's basically saying, yeah, but I understand the principles, and I understand what this recipe is trying to get at and do for me. But if I substitute that ingredient with this one, it's going to give me largely the same effect, because I understand what effect it's creating. So that's why it's important to go back and understand, really, really understand the principles. Well, when these little changes come up in your business, you know how to do things, because nothing works out in practice as it's written down in theory.
Well, that's how and one thing we talk about in theory, or in the beautiful world, you would walk in and your CFO and your CEO would be perfectly aligned. They would be driving the effort and be moving things forward. The reality is that doesn't happen in many companies. The way change, the way change really happens in many companies, it starts kind of middle out. It starts with somebody in the organization saying, this makes sense to me, what we're doing is dumb, we ought to stop doing that, and they convince their boss to give them some room, what we often call in change management terms an umbrella holder. The boss holds an umbrella over our head to keep the rain from corporate from coming down on us, but it gives us a little bit of space. And in that little bit of space, we can innovate and we can try some things, and we can begin to try to move to a rolling forecast, or we can begin to try to change our target setting into more aspirational, into more comparison with the customers. So we can take some of the principles and begin to apply them and work them forward in terms of what's happening. And as we begin to do that, then we basically can go forward with a little bit of experimentation, proving it out, taking these principles and making them in our nomenclature, in our culture, calling them our terms, and the organization can begin to own the change. And as they begin to do that, they begin to grow out. And as you grow out, it's like your example of ingredients. I didn't have all the ingredients when I started, but as I began to prove the concept and prove its worth, I acquired those ingredients over time, and I can convince people and expand and expand. In North America, as you're well aware, Peter, we've had an evolutionary path much more than a revolutionary path. So while we've had some great companies just all of a sudden do it overnight because they had top leadership support, in many cases we had to grow to get to that support. And so it's taken 2 to 4 years, or we might have had that support, but it wasn't really ready to leap all at once. So we've begun to try and change.
And that's true for many companies. Not so many take the totally revolutionary path, but I think even the evolutionary ones need the vision to know where they're trying to get to, and what they need to do to get there.
know what's possible.
Yeah. So I think that's the key point about implementation here. Now, I move on to the next bit, which is the cases,
Mm-hmm.
which you touched on
This
before.
this is part
And
4.
here, this is part 4, the
Yeah.
case summaries. As I say, these are just summaries of the original cases. And as I said before, we've put them in these sections. If I look at the Handelsbanken one, we've gone through those 5 chunks where we put the Beyond 12 principles into 5 groups. And we've looked at all these cases within the 5 groups to see what do they do, what has this case done about these things. And this is bringing that experience from these case studies back to the principles. Some of it we've had to go back and, if you like, retrofit it, because Handelsbanken didn't follow our principles when they did this. But what we've done is gone back and looked at that and said, so how does that fit within this description? And it pretty much does. So we've gone through this.
Peter,
And so you can see what those companies have done in each case of what's gone through. Yeah.
Peter, let me stop you right there, because that's one point that I think that's pretty important for people to understand is when we use a case, we're not trying to get anybody to be 100% match. The objective is to really articulate. Our goal is to help you improve the way you plan and control your organization. The 12 principles are universally what we've observed over many cases in many areas, but the principles are a composite that are built from those actual case experiences of what we've actually seen and come into. And so as we work through that, those things have evolved. Everybody should customize that for their own particular culture, but keep asking themselves the question about, of that principle, how does it apply to me? And if you deviate from what everybody else is doing, you have to ask, well, what's special? Why do we need to deviate in that area? And does that help enhance what we're trying to do, or does it begin to detract what we're trying to do? So the principles are really...
Absolutely.
Yeah, the principles are really ways to kind of see the way forward and then apply specifically. So there's a great article that we often advise the members to read. It's a Harvard Business Review article from 1999 by Andrew Campbell. It's a great article called Tailored, Not Benchmarked. And what Campbell does is describe 3 great companies in their planning process, Emerson Electric, Dow Chemical, and a British company, Gentia, that look at these companies, and they all are vowed to have good planning systems. Each one of them's planning system, though, was built for their customer, for their culture, their strategy, their management team. And the point Campbell makes, if you took any one of those systems and put it in the other 2, it would fail miserably. And it would fail because it didn't fit the strategy, didn't fit the culture, didn't fit the management team's ability to execute. And so whenever we're looking at these cases and these 12 principles, we're looking at how do we tailor it to fit our culture and our approach in terms of what's out there, and then figure out how to take those points home and make them real within our organization. So that, to me, is one of the key things to learn from cases.
Yep, exactly. And that's how we've used it. In fact, that reminds me, Steve, that where the principles came from. When we started in 1998, and we started going out and doing our original case studies then, and at the end of that year of Beyond Budgeting, we published a final report, which was quite amazing, really, that we thought we could do it all in one year. But
that was the early days.
But that was the early days. But then we discovered we hadn't learned it all. But what we found looking at all these cases was a number of common threads. And those common threads that we observed led on into the 12 principles that we have today. Mm-hmm. So that's where they've come from studying those original cases. And we've just, if you like, expanded those principles and deepened them by what we've learned from studying other companies since then.
Okay.
So that's where it's all coming from. And as you say, if you look at these cases, and these are the learning cases. If you look at Statoil here, which is probably one that's much more recent, has probably been following much more of what we've described in our 12 principles than some of those other cases.
Now, Statoil has the advantage, of those that aren't familiar, Statoil has the advantage of being led by BBRT Bognes, who's the guy that's implemented this twice. So BBRT has studied this very, very deeply, and has got generating some fantastic results up at Statoil.
Yeah, and he's written a book on it.
Right.
Which you can purchase through the Beyond Budgeting website.
Im- Implementing
Well,
beyond budgeting.
well,
There's our commercial for BRT. BRT, thank you. There, implementing beyond budgeting. Get it through the Beyond Budgeting website. So,
yeah.
I know he'll be happy about that.
Anyway, no, it's just making it easier for
Right.
for people, Steve. Anyway, what we've done in these sections, we've put why they've changed, what they've changed, what lessons they've learned, so that people can start to learn about it. What they changed, devolving more planning and decision-making responsibility to the teams closer to the customer. Ambition to action. This booklet that he's sent around to everyone, this document, it describes a bit about what that's about. What lessons they've learned. As he says, start with the case for change. Work around the resistors. Design to 80% and jump. This is another big thing, you know. A lot of people want to have perfection when they do the planning. It's got to be 100%. There's so much evidence out there to say 80% is good enough. Just do what's good enough and go, and then learn. And make it simple so that you can quickly redo it when you need to. Involve the HR people. A pool-based and company-owned implementation. They didn't use consultants for doing any of this. Some people do use some consultants to help them with specific parts of the implementation, but they don't use it to do the whole job for them. They need to learn for themselves. Don't become a fundamentalist. So he said, people often ask if the word budget is now forbidden. Of course it isn't, but we do ask people to try and avoid using it simply because it can cause confusion. So if we say budget instead of what we actually mean is target, forecast, or resource allocation.
Okay.
So that's the kind of thing. What do we mean by that word budget? And then be specific about it. So that's what we've put in these cases so that people can learn from these later cases what they're doing. And there's a couple of public sector ones here. Sightsavers International is a small UK charity that it says curing blindness. I'd say for members, if you want to know about that, go and look at the recent presentation given by Adrian Poffley at the meeting in Copenhagen back in March. That'll tell you everything you want to know about what went on there and his experiences both at Sightsavers and at the World Bank where he now is. And then Sydney Water, our director in Australia, Aubrey Joachim, did all of this work when he was at Sydney Water. So you've got some good points here about some public sector cases. But you know, we can still learn. We think that what they did at Sydney Water is a great example of how to manage your resource management, how to cope with that, give some input to that. So don't think, oh, I'm not public sector, I won't look at that. Look at them because you can still learn a lot from them, and vice versa. Okay. So that's the cases. Then the other thing we put as number 5 here is the theory. You might think, well, theory, that's a bit of a, no, we don't want to look at that, we're about practice here. But this is really trying to looking at the theory of management based on adaptive systems. So what's the background of command and control? What are today's needs? The problems we have with business schools today? How about economic thinking is moving on? Metaphors should be taken from quantum rather than Newtonian physics. Now this you may say that's getting very, very theoretical. But read it through. We try to write this in a way where what we're doing is trying to translate this very theoretical stuff into management speak, into language that managers can understand and relate to, so that they can get a feel for, well, this isn't just a load of flim-flam here. There is some substance behind what these guys are talking about. And that's what we've tried to do in this section. I won't go through all the things, but if you look at the 10 beliefs, so this is, I think, because these 10 beliefs are important, this really underpins what we believe in beyond budgeting, in the BBRT. And you can see the one there, organizations are adaptive systems, not obedient machines. And this says, we don't believe that they're just a set of cogs, a machine where you pull this lever and this happens. It's back to cause and effect, you know. If you know the effect, you can work out what the causes are, but often you don't know what's going to happen when you do certain things. It could have untold consequences which you don't even know yet. So these are the kind of things we want to go through and get people to understand this is the base, this is what's behind all of this. And if you understand this stuff as well, then you really know what to do when you're trying to implement and trying to do those practical things when, well, you haven't quite got all of those things, you haven't quite got all the ingredients, what are we going to do? But if you understand those 10 beliefs as well as the principles, then you can make a pretty good stab at doing things in practice in the business. And I found that throughout my career, making these sort of big changes in companies, that you've got to understand the principles and what's behind it all, and then you can do things properly. So that's I won't go through the theory in detail, but you can see again the sort of thing here. We've got our subsections down here, and all the navigation is always there to help you go through it and to work your way back. And then finally, we look at conclusions. We said we put in 7 tests of beyond budgeting. Let's bring this up in magnification, see if we can, and let you look at these in more detail. Is the model simple, low cost, and relevant to its users? Simple is a very key thing. Keep it simple. Does the model, this is the management model, does it help to find and keep the best people? Does it enable and encourage continuous innovation? Does the model drive operational excellence? Does the model lead to loyal and profitable customers? Does the model support good governance and ethical behavior? And does the model lead to sustained value creation? If it's doing all of that, then you've probably got a pretty good chance of success in the business as you go forward. And the business should be sustainable in it. And I think that what we've had over the last economic crisis has shown us that the companies that have got all of this have survived through it. Just to give everyone an example, Handelsbanken was and I don't want to keep using Handelsbanken, but there's so much comes out of that case. It was the only bank in Sweden that did not require assistance from the central government of Sweden through the banking crisis. Their profit actually increased during that year where all the other banks fell. So they've got to be doing something right. And people might say, well, they're a bit strange, but hey, they're doing something right. They managed to survive through the good times and the bad times. And this is what this model's about. It's about the good times and the bad times. It's making you flexible and adaptive so you can actually respond quickly when things go wrong. For us in the UK at the moment, of course, and for a lot of people in Europe, the big challenge is how do we get by when nobody can fly anywhere? That's challenges a lot of people's way of managing and their supply chains and all sorts of things. So can you cope around with that? So those are the kind of things. And then the last part we've put here is reconnecting frontline people to the organization and go through some of the objectives, some of the thoughts on that. So that's the sort of conclusions to what we're doing there. Excuse me. That's better. So that's the 7 tests, important. And then people keep asking us questions naturally. So we've tried to address some of these things in frequently asked questions, like, why should you change? Now this is just one whole page. It's not broken up into separate pages, it's just one whole page. Why should you change? And reiterating some of those points. What is beyond budgeting? Do we need to rethink our views about leadership? How should leaders be judged? There's another question. Now, if people, Steve, think about other questions and they say, well, I've got a different question, they're not covered here, send it to us and we'll look at it and try and work out a solution to that question and then put it back up here on the implementation guide so we can keep building this list of questions. So this is how we've tried to address all of the kind of issues that people might think about. Here's the last one. Where should I start? And of course we said join the round table. But
Well, as a roundtable member, Peter, I do think that's always a good place to start, because one thing you get when you join the roundtable is you get access to the implementation guide, which, I mean, this movement's been around for a decade, since the end of '97, early '98, when you founded it along with Jeremy Hope and Robin Fraser, and all this stuff began to come together. When we look back about a decade of research and effort and toil, the implementation guide certainly gives us a great place to pull all that together. And what I like about it is using the modern technology today to really kind of bring everybody together with that. I would take questions, but you and I are the only one here. We're doing this on video so everybody can bring it in. I'm sure we'll have some questions live later on that'll come in through the guide. But I want to thank you, Peter. I know because of the flight situation we've had to deal with a little bit of technology. I'm excited to use the new approaches that we have here with our world-class studio, and with doing this over Skype and sharing technology screens. I mean, we're literally, probably 2,000 miles apart from each other, but yet we're able to come together, we're able to communicate, we're able to share ideas and expertise and learn from each other. And that, in essence, is what a roundtable is about. It's not quite the same way King Arthur would have drawn it, where we'd all sit around the table together, but with this screen here, with this approach here, we can at least pull ourselves together globally. And so we're excited so we can learn from people like Sydney Water, from Telecom Malaysia, from people in Europe, Statoil, and the many of the great cases that we have over there. We can share the great cases we have from North America, like American Airlines, American Express, Park Nicollet Health Systems, and Time Warner Telecom, and LK, and the ones that we'll hear from shortly at the conference coming up. So very excited to have you, and I want to thank you. I know you're battling a cold there, but I appreciate you fighting through there, and I appreciate the tea that's helped keep your voice going. So thanks for hanging in there, Peter. We appreciate you taking us through the guide.
You're very welcome. And any of the questions, Steve, that people raise, feed them back to us, and we'll see if we can find answers to them.
Okay, that's great. And with that, we'll wrap up this session of talking through the online implementation guide. Thank you for coming. I'm Steve Player with the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable.